There is an ongoing and developing situation concerning an Opus Dei school that has been accused of failing to protect its student body from predators, and I think we need to talk about it. Goes without saying that this video comes with a trigger warning. What we're going to be discussing is not going to be appropriate for all audiences, so viewer discretion is heavily advised. Please consider giving this video a thumbs up, subscribing if you haven't already, and sharing it with someone that you know. When it comes to child safety, I think that awareness is key, and anything that we can do to raise awareness about the persistence of systems failing to protect the most vulnerable in our society, that's something that I think we need to be paying attention to. In addition to that, I also feel like I need to justify why you should care about this. If you are tuning in and you're not Catholic and you're not affiliated with Opus Dei or know anything about Opus Dei, you don't have a horse in the race and you haven't been kind of keeping up with what is happening with this Catholic organization, I want to give you some rationale for why this is something that you should still care about and why it's something that I think we need to focus on. So what I have pulled up here just before we get into the articles that I'm going to be presenting today, all of which are linked down below in the description of this video, so you can go and pull them up and check them out for yourself if you want to, but this is just a Google search page, well, DuckDuckGo, not Google, but, you know, a web search. And I want to read you what it says for my query, which was, where does Opus Dei exist? You could input some version of this into your web browser of choice, and I'm sure you would get some sort of a response similar to what I have here. And this is just the summary response. Take it with a grain of salt. You can quibble over the details here, but just take this in. Opus Dei has members in more than 90 countries worldwide, with a significant presence in regions such as Europe, the Americas, and Asia. The organization is structured as a personal prelature of the Catholic Church, allowing it to operate globally. So it doesn't matter if you are not Catholic, not affiliated, or connected to anything that could be impacted, you think, by Opus Dei. It really doesn't matter because this organization is global. And a quick look back through my work, a quick look at Google will indicate to you, should illustrate the fact that this organization has a habit of popping up in places where maybe it shouldn't be. People representing the organization keep popping up in certain places, and those places are in pretty important sectors of society. We're talking government, we're talking education, which is what we're going to be discussing today, entertainment, media, they are everywhere. And so even if you are not someone closely affiliated with the world of the Catholic Church and everything that it has going on, I would ask that you still listen in and give this its due diligence, just because we all live in a society, we all live in this world together, and none of this stuff exists in a vacuum. And there is a very real possibility for the types of traumas that are being inflicted on people, the types of things that I am discussing, having a ripple effect throughout society and impacting you regardless of whether or not you ever had anything to do with anything like this, because that is the nature of trauma. It sends out shockwaves and it impacts people so much further out from the initial victim or victims. It changes the way that our society functions, and that's something that I'm becoming further and further convicted of the longer that I am doing this kind of work, learning about trauma and learning about what it does to people, learning what it does on a societal level. We have to be aware. We have to learn. And Opus Dei is a global organization, and they are doing things that have global implications on a small and grand scale. So I hope that this convinces you to give what I am saying today your attention. With that said, I'm going to pull up a first article here and also plug in my laptop, because I realized I never did that. And we're not going to get through this if I don't do that. All right. So I have a series of articles because, as I said, this has been an ongoing situation, what we're going to be discussing today. And unfortunately, there's some decent coverage now because this has been playing out for a while, as you are going to see, as we're going to be getting in here today. I have tried to enlarge the web page here so that what you guys are seeing on your end is a little bit larger, so you can hopefully read what I am looking at here. Trying to make that as easy as possible. I feel like the font's pretty big. If not, you can just listen to my sultry tones reading it out to you, reading about a really terrible and entirely preventable situation. So this first article, this is from a Latin news site or Spanish news site, and I've translated it using just a translation extension on my browser through Firefox because it appears to be the best and most accurate that I have found. And this article was published on December 24th, 2025, so around a month ago or so. Headline reads, Alborada, a school linked to Opus Dei and accused of sexually abusing dozens of children, protected the alleged rapist for an entire school year. Teachers reportedly alerted authorities to strange or inappropriate behavior around September, 8 months before the worker's final expulsion. The case of alleged sexual abuse of dozens of children between the ages of 3 and 6 at Alborada School in Alcalá de Henares, Madrid, conceals ominous chapters and unanswered questions that have come to light during the legal proceedings. ElPlural.com has obtained access to internal emails from this private school, numerous complaints filed with the national police, and even testimonies from relatives of the victims, teaching staff, and witnesses involved in the case. This school has historical ties to Opus Dei both through its construction carried out by the Tajamar Foundation and through the current pastoral care provided by priests of the prelature to the students and their families, as acknowledged by the Opus Dei office in Spain in statements to elplural.com. So Opus Dei has taken ownership of this school, essentially admitted that it is in fact a school associated with the prelature of Opus Dei through and through. In May of this year, 8 months ago, the teacher at the school, whose name this paper is withholding out of respect for her privacy, reported inappropriate behavior by a caregiver with a large group of children in his charge, ranging in age from 3 to 6, some of whom had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. To support her complaint, the teacher provided video evidence that graphically showed the caregiver touching and engaging in sexual activity with some of the children enrolled at El Alborada. However, despite the fact that at the time the center itself removed the caregiver, filed a complaint, he was arrested and a restraining order was imposed on him from the school and some of the children whose families reported the events. Now, the families, tired of the lack of protection they feel from both the school and the justice system and the institutions, have wanted to break their silence and expose how the center waited too long to act, even protecting the alleged abuser for almost a whole school year without taking action. Following this initial alarm, elplural.com obtained testimonies from some of the teachers and their contributions to the case. These professionals, as this newspaper has verified and read firsthand, claim they informed the school about what was happening several months prior, approximately, in September 2024. Furthermore, addressing the understandable doubts arising from their statements, they specify that the Alborada administration, upon learning of the indications, quote, did not activate any protocol nor take any action. It wasn't until May, after the teacher filed a complaint regarding behavior she had observed since April 22nd, that the school dismissed the accused. That is, 8 months after the initial alarm was raised. This newspaper also contacted the school to get their side of the story following this evidence. The head of the preschool, Pilar Bada, when asked about it, denied the accusations made by her own teachers. Quote, we had no prior knowledge of this. When the news broke, the moment someone tells us what they saw and what might have happened, what they believe happened, we go to the police, end quote, she told this publication. This version of events is completely at odds with the complaints filed by teachers and even with the perceptions of the families of some of the dozens of children allegedly abused by this caregiver. To this end, as this newspaper has been able to confirm through several emails exchanged between the school and the PTA and the families, Alborada School exhausted all available options, meeting the families with, quote, therapy or talks for parents and more individualized sessions for students, the option of a few external psychological support tools rituals, and above all, the insistence on convincing the affected parties not to file a complaint, assuring them that the matter would be resolved internally. Well, now here we are nearly 2 years later, and it does not appear that that happened. Currently, the person involved is free pending trial and is subject to a restraining order prohibiting him from being within 100 meters of the school, and sources add from some of the children. The sources, who requested anonymity due to the titan that is Opus Dei, so people are afraid of this organization, and that's something they must contend with if they are going to speak out about this, acknowledge the fear that the case could escalate because, as the testimonies reveal, this is someone who performs the duties of a caregiver and chaperone, including Boy Scouts, summer camps, early morning activities, playgrounds, and cafeterias, and is particularly involved with a minor who has dwarfism. Meanwhile, they condemn not only the center's failure to do enough, but also its defense of the alleged abuser, despite the evidence presented. He is very affectionate, one of the children, and he reciprocates that affection. The document analyzed by this newspaper state, he has no lewd intentions. He loves the children very much, they add. The school denies these claims, stating that the school's policy is not to treat children affectionately, but they are confirmed by several sources involved in the investigation and by the victims' families. In fact, as stated in one of the complaints, the alleged abuser even told the classmates that when he was young, he had to take medication because he had a trauma that repeatedly made him think about having sex with girls, which is a really strange and out of line and inappropriate thing to admit to someone. He told classmates this. This harrowing testimony underscores the pain of the parents of the sexually abused children. He would tell them to play wolf in sheep's clothing. I don't even want to talk about it. Imagine what that means, one of the parents contacted by this newspaper said through tears. Have any of you guys watching this seen the movie? Oh man, now I'm not going to be able to remember what it Split. It's called Split. It's part of the kind of like multiverse of like Mr. Glass, and there's another movie that was made, but Split specifically is about an individual who has dissociative identity disorder and has all these various alters that manifest, and he kidnaps this child, and there is an element not involving the kidnapper or the kidnappee, but rather the kidnappee, the child's uncle, that is about child abuse, child sexual abuse. Specifically, there's that storyline element in this movie, Split. And it's not graphic. They don't show anything, but they allude to a game that this family member would play with this child victim in this movie, and it was sort of something like this wolf in sheep's clothing thing, which is interesting. It's interesting because this is a real situation. Apparently, this parent is alleging that this predator was telling these students that they should play this wolf in sheep's clothing game. And in that movie, that is something that they do. And it makes me wonder, just within the subject of like predatory behaviors, I've noticed, just because I read a lot and I listen to a lot of podcasts from survivors and people who specifically work in the area of like child protection and child like sex crimes and that kind of thing, that there are themes, common themes and elements, and of course fetishes and that kind of thing that these predators and pedophiles really, really like. And I just wonder if this is one. I'm sure it is. Why not? It must be. It's absolutely disgusting. And anyway, before I go on and continue reading this, it goes without saying that this video, just because of the content, what we are discussing, it's not going to be loved by the YouTube algorithm or any other algorithm where I upload it. So if you are interested in supporting my work and what I am trying to do and the awareness that I'm trying to raise about matters of public concern, if you appreciate that and you would like to, you can buy me a coffee for $5, and there's a link for that down below. You can also do super chats and super stickers, and thank you to everybody who has done that up to now. I sincerely appreciate it so much. I refuse to censor myself when it comes to these serious issues and problems. I believe we need to use the real language for the real seriousness. We need to treat these issues with the gravity that they deserve. I'm not going to censor myself or use fake language to try to get around an algorithm or something like that, I'm going to be honest. So thank you for everyone who has supported that honesty up to this point. You make it much easier to do this kind of work. So anyway, with that said, let's read on. Alplural.com has obtained dozens of complaints from families, teachers, and witnesses. However, the scope of the case could be much larger, as authoritative sources speak of nearly 50 complaints and around 20 victims. Many of the children have autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and all are between 3 and 6 years old, babies, as previously mentioned, although the caregiver also allegedly attempted to abuse elementary school students. The ASD diagnosis makes the students even more vulnerable. This fact is revealing and undermines the timeliness of the legal process, which is detrimental to the families. Nevertheless, the parents have turned to the Barnahus Service of the Community of Madrid, which specializes in the assessment and care of children and adolescents who have suffered sexual violence, as well as their families. In some cases, services were provided, but in others, they regret that they were not, at least not fully. This is something that I spoke at length with my last interview of 2025, former social worker and author Trisha. She has an incredible story and experience, and you should listen to it. But we also talked about just the hurdles that victims have to overcome to access care after they suffer something like this type of abuse, which is tragically incredibly common, and yet the resources to properly assist people who are dealing with the resulting trauma are oftentimes woefully insufficient, underfunded, difficult to access for a variety of different reasons, and that is something that needs to be addressed. And I am concerned that with our current political trajectory, we're getting further away from prioritizing those kinds of things. And unfortunately, this is a problem that's not going to go away. But I will talk about that more in a minute. Needless to say, I'm not surprised that some people were able to access services and others were not. That seems very indicative of just the experience that victim survivors have when they are looking for care. Alplural.com has also confirmed the exchange of accusations in court between the school and the employee. As this newspaper has been able to verify, in June, the school went to the Court of Instruction Number 5 of Alcalá de Henares, requesting to be admitted as a party to the proceedings, arguing that the case and its perpetrator seriously violated the rights of several minors and the rights and interests of the institution. Quote, the very significant damage already caused to the image and interests of the Alborada School Foundation, as well as the damage that may still be caused to the image and good name of the school as the procedure progresses, are difficult to assess today and fully justify our participation in the procedure from the outset. End quote, the document states. For its part, the caregiver's defense argued that the organization, quote, can in no way be considered a victim of the crime and entitled to file a civil action, but rather the opposite, is subsidiarily liable for it. This is supported by a series of appeals. It's interesting. So they're basically saying that they're not responsible. Alborada.com has also contacted the Alcalá de Henares City Council and the Community of Madrid. The City Council maintains that the families have not contacted them and that, in any case, the matter falls under the jurisdiction of the regional government. For its part, the Regional Ministry of Family, Youth, and Social Affairs had not issued a response at the time of publication. If anyone is affected by the Alborada case and doesn't know where to turn, please write to the following email here. And again, this article and all of the following that we are going to be reading will be linked down in the description of this video. So please go and pull any and all of this up and share it widely and do what you feel you must with it. This orients us, though. This is the issue. This is what we are talking about. And this is something that has continued to come up in the news since the new year. So we have some developments to discuss as well. The reason why I am discussing this is twofold. One, it's because it concerns a school linked to an organization that I have been spending a lot of time researching and raising public awareness about, basically for going on 6 years now, which is kind of surreal, but also because it is about public safety, specifically child safety, something that's very, very important to me. And I think that the only way, like I said at the beginning, that any of this is going to change, that we're going to move the needle on these issues and get ahead of these kinds of tragedies continuing to occur, is if we become very, very vocal and informed. Because the reality is, while, yes, I am focusing on this because it's Opus Dei, unfortunately, this type of thing, predatory people and pedophiles, exist throughout every strata of society, every race, religion, creed, nationality. It does not matter. They are among us. And it is something that we must contend with. It is a reality. And that means that our social resources and our institutions and our public goods like schools and libraries and places where people who may be vulnerable are going to be, that there are measures and means in place to protect them. Because that is clearly not happening right now. And I think that there are a lot of different reasons for that, but that's not even necessarily what I want to get into today. I just want to focus on this one issue. Because, and another reason for it is that it has been my personal belief for quite some time now that this organization has a problem with abuse of a variety of shades, but including child sexual abuse. Why do I feel that way? Because this is hardly the first situation or story. This is one of several that have been developing or hit the press and broken or were wrapping up all throughout the last 6 years. There's so much happening under the umbrella of Opus Dei RE abuse. And it boggles the mind how anyone could look at this thing and not realize that there's a problem here that needs to be contended with, but people, for many reasons, don't want to do that. Be that as it may, I think this is something that we need to talk about, because, like I said, there are predators everywhere, and Opus Dei is a global organization. There are obviously ways that predatory people are utilizing that system to get into contact with and harm at-risk people, vulnerable people, children. And so we're going to keep moving through here and reading the rest of these articles, but keep all of that in the back of your mind as we're going forward. I hope that my justifications for wanting to discuss this are clear. I think Opus Dei has a problem here, and this is not even the first time that I've talked about a problem of or case of child sexual abuse in Opus Dei, and it won't be the last, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say. And this organization needs to do some serious, like, come to Jesus type work and get a grip on this thing now, or other authorities will come in and do it for them. All right, moving on to the next article here. Let me enlarge this font so hopefully you guys can read along with me if you so desire. So this was published on December 25th, 2025. Headline reads, Sexual Abuse at Alborada School, Complaints, Silence, and Demands for Accountability. The reports published by El Plural have brought to light an alleged case of child sexual abuse at the Alborada School, a private school affiliated with Opus Dei, and a possible prolonged inaction despite internal warnings. The allegations, the blocking of a parliamentary question, and the testimonies of families have sparked a political and institutional debate about responsibilities, protection protocols, and the role of the community of Madrid in educational institutions. Reports published in recent days by El Plural have placed a suspected case of child sexual abuse at the Alborada School, a private school affiliated with Opus Dei in the community of Madrid, at the center of public debate. According to the newspaper, the case is not limited to the individual actions of a staff member, but rather points to a prolonged possible inaction by the school despite internal warnings, which has provoked a strong political and institutional reaction. Now, it is possible we're going to be reading some repeat pieces of information here, since this article is citing the El Plural article that I think we just read, but We're going to be picking up some new little nuggets of information as we go through, and I think it's important just to try to get a clear picture of what is happening here, just so we can try to understand from the position of being the public what is actually going on here. According to the initial investigation published on December 23rd, 2025, the school allegedly kept a staff member on staff for an entire academic year who was later accused of sexual abuse despite warnings from teachers at the school about inappropriate behavior. The newspaper El Plural estimates the scope of the case at nearly 15 complaints and around 20 victims, boys and girls, now we're learning, between the ages of, they're saying 0 and 6. The original article said 3 and 6. But babies, these are babies, some of whom have special educational needs. According to this information, no protection protocol was activated, nor was the employee warned after the first warning signs appeared. If confirmed, this would constitute a serious breach of the prevention and protection duties in educational centers, especially when dealing with young children. Well, yes, I would hope so, and expect that there would be some breach of something, that this is happening, that that is not just happening in a system completely devoid of any type of protocol or any type of measure of protecting these babies. The controversy escalated on December 24th when El Plural reported that the Madrid Assembly's governing board had blocked a parliamentary question related to the case. This decision increased the pressure on the regional government, which is responsible for the inspection, supervision, and control of state-subsidized private schools. The parliamentary deadlock was interpreted by various sectors as a maneuver that hinders accountability in an extremely sensitive matter. So they're potentially utilizing the system, essentially, to their ends. Political and social circles emphasize that the essential judicial investigation cannot replace a rigorous administrative inquiry to determine whether the center acted in accordance with regulations and whether the administration properly exercised its oversight functions. That same day, Alborada School released a statement defending the presumption of innocence of the accused employee and requesting that he be allowed to recover his life during the Christmas holidays. This message has generated unease among the affected families who feel that the focus has shifted away from the suffering of the children and the need to clarify who is responsible, which, based on how I have seen Opus Dei handle child abuse allegation cases in the past, sounds pretty on trend to me. The most recent case, and I'm sure we will read it referenced here at some point, the Gatzalueta case, which concerns a 15-year-old abuse allegation against a teacher at an Opus Dei school by a former student. That whole thing wrapped up within the last couple of years or so, but then there were canonical proceedings that were dragging out after that. And in the press, I noticed and made comment and have still so much confusion over was the fact that it slipped very quickly from being about the victim, the victim's families, what were being done to help them, blah, 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 to the experience of this convicted pedophile throughout this canonical proceeding that was, I guess, supposed to determine his standing with Opus Dei and with the church in general or something like that, and how the proceeding took the external civil or criminal court case that played out against this individual, took that into too much consideration when making their decision and sanctioning this individual. So that's pretty normal. It happens pretty much all the time from what I've seen. That does not mean that that is good or right or that's how things should be, but seems to be the way that it goes. On December 25th, El Plural published a new report in which families of allegedly abused minors denounced a feeling of abandonment, not only by the school, but also by other institutions. According to these testimonies, the family felt alone, disoriented, and received little psychological and social support while the case progressed slowly. The families are demanding discretion, professional support, and that they not be exposed publicly. They also insist that no one acted in time, even though the teachers were reportedly aware of the situation months before the case became public. This account reinforces the idea that the problem is not limited to a suspected aggressor, but affects the detection, response, and protection mechanisms that should be automatically activated in the face of any suspicion of child abuse. In this context, Mas Madrid Alcala has issued a public statement echoing the information published by El Plural and demanding immediate explanations for what it considers extremely serious events. The spokesperson for the municipal group, Rosa Romero, emphasizes that the absolute priority must be the protection of minors and support for the victims and their families, noting that these are very young children with special needs. The group demands that the justice system act with full guarantees, but warns that the legal route alone is not enough. Mas Madrid Alcala requests a thorough administrative investigation into the center's actions and demands clear explanations from the community of Madrid responsible for the educational inspection of subsidized schools. So this is a school of Opus Dei that is receiving federal funding. Furthermore, the group raises the need to review the educational agreement of the Alborada school in light of the information known, conditioning any public funding on strict compliance with child protection protocols, transparency, and full collaboration with authorities. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, Spain has very different laws around which entities may receive federal funding and if they may or may not be religious. Obviously, here in the United States, we have something which is known as the separation of church and state, such that even a religious educational institution should not be able to receive federal funding for their educational endeavors, because it would go against freedom of religion, freedom from religion, which is a constitutional enshrined right that Americans have. That doesn't really exist in Spain. They don't have that separation of church and state thing. It's a much closer relationship over there. So that is why there is this discussion about what's to be done with this school that's been accused of dropping the ball so fantastically on child protection, that's been receiving federal funding, because Spaniards pay taxes too, so that's public funds going into something like that, which I would have to imagine they would not be too happy about. I would be livid if something like that happened over here. The statement from Mas Madrid Alcala, oh, and I know I'm probably going to get somebody in the comments saying, oh, it does happen here. There are schools that get funding and federal funding even though they're religious, blah, blah, blah. Yes, I know there are loopholes sometimes that some schools take advantage of, but it's not the same type of situation as what's happening over in Spain, as what Spain has. It's just not. Anyway, the statement from Mas Madrid Alcala also incorporates a fundamental statement that transcends this specific case: the insufficient number of inclusive public school places, especially for children with special educational needs. According to the party, the shortage forces many families to opt for private or subsidized schools that do not always meet their desired educational standards. The municipal group is calling for a strengthening of the public network, both in resources and inclusive places, to prevent the lack of alternatives from influencing such sensitive decisions as the schooling of vulnerable children. Meanwhile, the case remains under judicial investigation and continues to generate political and social reactions. While awaiting the determination of criminal responsibility, the focus also remains on the role of institutions, the actions of the center, and the need to ensure that similar situations do not reoccur. Now, they say here that the municipal group is calling for the strengthening of the public network to prevent the lack of alternatives from influencing sensitive decisions like the schooling of vulnerable children. I would argue that it should also be taken a step further, and any institution in any way, shape, or form that is interacting with children, and especially if it's an educational institution, but those people in those positions need to be mandatory reporters. If you are interacting with a child and you are under some sort of like employment volunteer agreement in that capacity, either you're a teacher, teacher's aide, volunteer in the classroom, whatever, you are now a mandatory reporter. You go and volunteer on the weekends with your local hometown t-ball team, you're now a mandatory reporter. I think we need to start holding the line, honestly. it's not enough to just expect that we can create these frameworks and these protocols and put more funding into these public networks, which is a good thing. Those are all good things. But that on its own is not going to move the needle on this issue, because it's a personal thing. It's a people thing. It comes down to how we move through our lives and our family units. It comes down to how we relate to one another, the things that we normalize, how we are raised and taught to relate to each other, all of that stuff. And I think that if you are going to be anywhere around children in any capacity, congratulations, you are now a mandatory reporter. And that even just means just being at a park, just sitting under a tree, reading a book, and you see a playground. If you see somebody over there who doesn't look right, doesn't seem like they're a parent, and they're acting squirrely, you have a responsibility to say and do something about it, to get confrontational if you can. Obviously, don't put yourself in a dangerous situation, but don't, out of some misguided sense of self-preservation, allow a child to be put into a dangerous situation just because you don't want to rock the boat. We're rocking the boat. We're tipping it right over. And everybody who is contributing to this type of harm, they're going to be left out of it. And they can swim all to an island somewhere and live there all by themselves. But that is the only way that our society is going to change. I truly believe it. I truly believe it. If you disagree, feel free to disagree. You're entitled to your opinion. Mine is pretty much set. So moving on to the next article. Let me close out these few tabs that we already got through. So this is another El Plural article. They've been doing the bulk of the coverage on this story. This was published on December 26th. So there were a series of stories coming out in rapid succession here, if you've been keeping track of the dates. How Alborada sought to silence the parents of the victims. Quote, "It's a David versus Goliath situation." The school reportedly limited its attention to communications and emails, meetings, or related professionals. Let me enlarge this here just a bit. Oh, it's already enlarged. Hopefully you guys can see that pretty well. Let me know in the comments if you can or you can't. I'm trying to play around with what works best so that everybody's having a decent viewing and listening experience. So thank you for your feedback. But this says, families at the Alborada school in the Alcalá de Henares, Madrid are facing a titan. This is how authorized sources summarized to elplural.com the magnitude of the case of alleged sexual abuse affecting children between the ages of 3 and 6 at this private school, several of whom have autism spectrum disorder by a former caregiver. This newspaper has published a series of exclusives that would demonstrate how the academic space silenced the scandal from approximately September 2024 until May 2025, at which time it proceeded to dismiss the worker after a teacher, after several months of noticing sexual and completely inappropriate behavior with the minors in her care. After several months of noticing sexual and completely inappropriate behavior, this wasn't a 1 or 2 time thing of seeing something that was kind of out of line. Months. She decided to file a complaint after months of that, which documented graphically with videos recorded with her own mobile phone. This poor teacher. No one should have to see that. No one should be put through that. Oh my God. Up to that point, as shown by the documentation analyzed by this newspaper, dozens of complaints, witness statements, internal emails, and testimonies, everything that was limited to warnings to the employee to refrain from his behavior, but without activating any protocols or measures. The Catholic school, part of the Arenales network and with historical ties to Opus Dei, denied any knowledge of the events and statements to this newspaper, and after publication, issued a statement to parents along the same lines. The families show that it has been and continues to be a painful journey, not only because of the seriousness and scope of what happened. There are about 20 possible victims and around 50 complaints and witnesses, but also because of the management of the different administrations and, above all, the school. The affected parties lament that until they filed their complaint, Alborada focused its efforts on asking for discretion, and that once it did act, it did so in a minimal and meticulously calculated way to avoid leaks. Thus, the center reportedly limited its actions to offering general meetings for parents, individual conversations for the children, therapists affiliated with the center, which means most likely Opus Dei therapists, which I don't like. And you can refer to my catalog of work if you want to know why I don't like that. And various messages and or statements to reassure families and prevent anything from escaping its control. These complaints from the families perfectly align with the documentation analyzed by this publication throughout the investigation. When everything exploded, several school officials got together and said it could damage the school's image and had to be handled very discreetly. Sources explained to this newspaper this caution would be part of a strategy that complemented attempts to divide families, lies, and even other outright illegal actions. Holy shit, Batman. The maneuvers within the academic sphere could have become truly murky. Quote, I don't know if you know what MECs are, ... end quote, they asked this newspaper. They are mothers who take their children to the school, but they're practically married to it. They would go into meetings to, let's say, play the role of crying because they were harming the school and try to reassure the families that they believed in the word of God and that nothing was wrong. So these are basically people that come out to carry water and play defense for this school, these MECs. I wonder what that stands for. There are even rumors of a connection between the alleged abuser and the school beyond the strictly professional. Specifically, he is identified as a former student of the school, the godson of the head of the preschool, and the adopted son of one of the foundations with which Alborada School has collaborated. So this guy is legacy Alborada, if not legacy Opus Dei. I would be very shocked if that were not the case. So this is as internal of a problem as it could possibly be. The school also denies these connections in a phone conversation, specifically with Pilar Bada, the head of the early years department. Quote, I don't have any godsons at the school. He's not the godson of any current or former head of early years at the school, she stated. Regarding other possible connections, such as being a former student, she simply noted that this information was already provided to the media at the time. So, keeping things very close to the vest. The parents who took a stand did so as best they could with the limited resources and information still available to them today. No one has informed us of the steps to take, nor have they contacted us, they say, which has led some to decide to act independently. Others, those consulted, lament, haven't even taken action because they are too closely aligned with the school and the network of religious groups that supports it. Let that sink in. There are people with children, potentially victims of this abuse, who can't take action, feel that they are unable to take action because they're too closely aligned with the school and the network of religious groups that support it. One of which, perhaps the primary of which, is Opus Dei. That tracks to me. That tracks. You go on Opus Dei Exposed, Opus Libris, ODAN, you will see stories from people saying that they left as quietly and carefully as they could without trying to make any fuss, without trying to draw any attention. And now the only way that they are able to talk about their experiences is anonymously on internet forums because they are afraid of the ramifications if this organization were to find out that they are speaking negatively about them. People's professional lives are threatened. People's privacy has been invaded. It's the behavior of an organization that functions a lot like a cult. A lot like a cult. A very specific one, honestly, the one that comes to mind when I read so much of this stuff, especially the keeping things internal and keeping things very close to the vest and the behavior of some members after people leave, stalking and harassing them, it gives Scientology. It really does. It is worth noting that the center is a private school with historical ties to Opus Dei, yes indeed, both because of its construction carried out by the Tahamar Foundation after obtaining the public land thanks to a land transfer in 2009 by the government of Esperanza Aguirre, and because of the current service provided by priests of the prelature for the pastoral care of the students and their families, as acknowledged by the Opus Dei office in Spain in statements to elplural.com. However, some of the parents who enrolled their children here are not even religious. They were forced to do so due to the lack of specialized classrooms for students with autism spectrum disorder in other schools in the community of Madrid. In fact, given the circumstances, they have desperately tried to transfer their children to other schools without success. Again, the same notice is at the bottom of this article. If anyone's affected by the Alborada case and doesn't know where to turn, please write to the following email. So, like I said at the beginning of this thing, Opus Dei is an organization with a global presence. And within that, when you start to dig into the meat and taters of how the whole thing works, what you notice very quickly, what I noticed very quickly, is that there is a very even homogenization of behaviors and characteristics and traits that Opus Dei replicates, and pretty much every single place where it puts down roots, obviously starting in Spain and then spreading out from there into Latin America and the rest of the world ever since its founding in 1928. And because of that homogenization, because of the fact that this organization, like carbon copy replicates, does the exact same thing place to place to place to place that it goes, I have no reason not to believe that the behavior of the school in this case is, in fact, the modus operandi for Opus Dei schools in general. That's my deduction, my hypothesis, my read based on what I'm presenting here and all the other publicly available information that I've been accessing. I have no reason not to believe that a similar response would be had in any Opus Dei school anywhere. That it's to minimize, to keep things in-house, to keep things quiet as much as possible. And I already have the confirmation for feeling that way because I have heard a similar experience from other people who are attempting to raise awareness about an abuse case in an institution affiliated with this organization. Another reason why I think it's important to talk about this thing, because even though this is about a school in Madrid, Spain, it's a global organization, very homogenous. Do you think there's absolutely no chance something like this isn't happening somewhere else? You would be wrong for thinking that. And I can say that pretty confidently just because, again, I have an awareness of what's going on in this organization when it comes to the issue of child safety and child abuse. That's giving me a little bit of a wider lens here. And also because it's not the first time that I've heard something like this. I like to look at trends. I see trends. I see things that consistently come up. When you step back, you can look at the forest for the trees. I'm looking at the whole damn forest, and I think it needs to burn. Reading on. This is another article, elplural.com. This was published in the new year on January 2nd. The deputy headmaster of the Alborada school implicated in child sexual abuse cases is the PP mayor of Anchuelo, Madrid. Relatives of the alleged victims believe that the way the authorities handled the case in particular and the center in general could be related to this connection. So there's an intergovernmental political thread running through this. What do you know? What are the odds? Javier Doncel Fernandez is the deputy director of Alborada, a school in Alcalá de Henares affected by a case of sexual abuse by a former caregiver against dozens of children between the ages of 3 and 6, some of them with autism spectrum disorder. And he's also the mayor of Anchuelo in Madrid. I am guessing that Anchuelo, and I may not be pronouncing that correctly, and I apologize if I am butchering that, but I'm assuming that's like a suburb or like small outskirt town of like Madrid city proper, but I'm guessing. because it says here that the municipality, with just over 1,400 inhabitants, according to data from the National Institute of Statistics, is governed by the Popular Party, PP, and the mayoral staff is held by the same person who, for more than 14 years, has been one of those responsible for the place that is at the center of the controversy, Alborada. Several websites demonstrate the connection of the protagonists of this article with the political party led regionally by Isabel Diaz Ayuso and with the Catholic private-public partnership school with historical ties to Opus Dei. On the City Council's website, his name appears alongside that of Mayor-President, and he himself confirms this on his LinkedIn profile, where he is listed as Mayor of Anchuelo, Madrid, and Deputy Director of the Alborada School. Those LinkedIn profiles never lie. Both relatives of allegedly abused children and other critical voices who have stood firm against the secrecy and possible cover-up of the academic space warn in conversations with elplural.com of a possible preferential treatment between the parties that would have begun to take shape in the time of Esperanza Aguirre, when the government of the former president ceded 24,000 meters of land to build a school that, at least in its origins, separated the students by sexes. After years of awards from the Complutense Council, and while some sources even speak of tax favors, suspicions have been increasing in parallel with the information that this media outlet has published in recent weeks after consulting extensive documentation in the form of internal emails, complaints, testimonies, and first-person accounts that would corroborate complaints of the affected party regarding the inaction of the center. Several of the specific points in the investigation allow for reasonable doubt and point to administrations governed by the People's Party, especially the Community of Madrid. In this regard, it is worth noting that the Assembly's governing board vetoed a question from Mas Madrid in November that concerned the case because it did not pertain to a matter of regional scope as it referred to a private center. The question was to find out how many requests for transfer of academic records have been received since the cases of alleged sexual abuse of children at the Alborada School and Alcalá de Henares became known until today, a point also especially hindered by the autonomy, according to the families who have decided to break their silence. The parents, whose children were allegedly affected by the workers' abuse, tried to change schools, but without success. The reasons given vary, but the different sources point to the Territorial Area Directorate. The veto of questions about the school had to have an explanation beyond the power of Opus Dei. So they're saying that there are other reasons why they're having a hard time. In other news, on December 23rd, the Alborada Foundation of the Alborada School won the first Alcalá City Christmas Carol competition, awarded with €1,000 and, above all, media attention, coinciding with the first reports that came to light about the possible silence on the part of the school regarding the sexual abuse of minors. I would consider that a mixed bag. The statement, which is repeated in several publications of this newspaper, is based on the fact that some of the teaching staff raised the alarm approximately in September of 2024, but it was not until May of the following year that the school proceeded to dismiss the worker through a complaint, according to witnesses. It says that Javier Doncel holds a degree in philology from the Complutense University of Madrid, UCM, and has served as the head of secondary school at Tajamar from 1983 to 2007, whose foundation has ties to the center and whose school of the same name is linked to Opus Dei. And then at another location, another school that segregates by sex and sanctioned a school in 2019 for photographing students who are giving the fascist salute while holding 2 Spanish flags full of references to Vox. So those are the types of academic affiliations that this person has, which is interesting. And I think you can, birds of a feather flock together. You can make a lot of deductions about public figures by the associations and affiliations that they maintain. So we're moving right along. Let's see. We have 3 more articles after this one. I just wanted to give a very complete picture of what is going on with this situation so far. So thank you for bearing with me. I know this is a long one. So this article was published on January 4th, again in El Plural. And it's a guide against sexual abuse for victims of Alborada. Quote, it is essential to be organized. Those affected by the alleged child abuse at the center and the silence of the academic community explain to the victims how to proceed step by step. Families and teachers at the Alborada School in Alcalá de Henares are redoubling their efforts to seek justice in the face of alleged sexual abuse of minors that reportedly took place at this Catholic private school with historical ties to Opus Dei, as well as the deafening silence maintained by the academic community regarding the extensive documentation accessed by elplural.com to compile the various reports published in recent weeks. They say that it's a David and Goliath situation. They're adhering to two key principles: unity and the support of the best professionals. However, the steps to take these kinds of situations are anything but simple. It says that in order to break down the wall and get to the bottom of the matter, the victims have decided to echo the alleged sexual abuses in the media, and once it has come to light, more forcefully in the press on social networks. So basically, these poor people have gotten tired of the lack of serious response to this situation, and so they are mobilizing. And I support that. Power to the people. Again, like I was saying earlier, the only way that this is going to change, the only way that we're going to begin to move the needle on eliminating these types of abuses in our society is if we all start mobilizing and become mandatory reporters and become people who are holding the line on things like child safety. On these websites, those behind the profiles who prefer to remain anonymous, well, what websites? It says, let's see. In this way, the people affected by what could be called the Alborada case work in parallel via email. It says that on X and Instagram, those behind the profiles, the victims who are anonymous for fear of reprisals, republish articles of interest on the subject and explain how to act for those who want to do so but don't know how. Got you. So they're mobilizing but anonymously because these poor people are afraid of retribution from an organization that, in their defense, has been litigious in the past and I am sure would be again if they had even the slightest opportunity to do that and win. It really only makes sense to do that if you're going to win. Under the titles Simple Guide to Proceed in Case of Suspected Child Sexual Abuse in Our Specific Case, and Guide to Steps to Follow in the Event of Suspected Child Abuse, the above Instagram account recommended, above all, acting in a orderly manner as much as possible, and despite how difficult it is to maintain a minimum of calm. The next steps they outline begin with a medical evaluation. This means taking the child to the pediatrician, to whom it is vital to explain all of the observed signs such as sudden changes in behavior starting on specific dates, unusual injuries, changes in their relationship with sexuality, symbolic references such as mentioning a wolf or other strange figures, reoccurring nightmares, or night terrors. Following this, the professional will conduct a professional assessment to determine if there are any signs of abuse. Next comes the social assessment. If the pediatrician's report is positive, then confirms the suspicions, the case will be passed on to the social worker at the clinic or health center, who will conduct an interview with the family, and if this report is also positive, both documents, medical and social, will be combined and to be sent to the court and attached to the complaint. Now they move to the legal sphere. With the reports in hand, you must go to the police station. In this specific case, it is sufficient to indicate that it is a complaint related to the Alborada school case. The guide explains, advising that it is recommended to submit it together with the medical and social documentation obtained previously. The next steps involve legal assistance and pretrial evidence, and that is a long and lengthy process. The first point allows the child to give their version of events in a protected and early manner, preventing them from having to testify in court years later and reliving the trauma. And then the lawyer will handle the necessary legal procedures. After completing these formalities, the waiting phase begins. It is important to be aware that legal processes are usually slow, so patience and emotional support will be required for the child and the family during this time. Now, obviously, this is referring to a specific case in a specific region in a country that is not the United States or the UK, but it goes without saying that if you are listening to this and you are ever run into a situation, or maybe you're in a situation currently where you feel like you need to be taking some notes and finding some people to contact, you can do a similar thing in your country to what they are advising here. This is pretty much, from what I've seen, standard good advice for if you are trying to gather evidence that something like child sexual abuse has occurred, or any type of abuse for child or adult. You've got to get your ducks in a row. And it's really sad, just to add this in before I close this article out, it's sad that the victims' families are having to mobilize and gather together and figure out how to organize and get this information out to other families. That seems disordered and backwards. That should be coming either from the school or from competent civil authorities, and that's just not happening. So this is another article talking about that civil organization. This was published January 6th. Mas Madrid Alcala, we read about it a minute ago, demands explanations regarding the possible cover-up of sexual abuse at the Alborada school. So they have not gotten quiet. They have redoubled their efforts, and they still are looking for some type of accountability, which I think is fantastic. The private school is part of the Aranelle's educational network, as is the Santa Monica School in Rivas. The Mas Madrid Alcala Municipal Group has demanded public explanations regarding the possible cover-up of sexual abuse at the Alborada school. They state on their social media accounts the abuse allegedly occurred at this private Catholic school affiliated with Opus Dei. A group expressed full support of the victims and their families. The complaint comes after the online newspaper elplural.com reported that the Alborada school had protected the alleged aggressor, who was arrested last May. According to the publication, although the school itself filed the complaint and suspended the employee, it had been aware of the incidents before the start of the school year. When contacted by elplural.com, the head of early childhood education at the private school denied the accusation, stating, "We had no prior knowledge of this incident." Mas Madrid Alcala believes that it is unacceptable that a center supported with public funds could have failed in its duty of care in this way. And I agree, it's especially tragic considering the fact that a number of families had placed their children with ASD at this school because it was one of the few options in Madrid. So now we're going to start learning a little bit more about the school's network, basically, and I think that this is really interesting. It says that Alborada is part of the Aranelle's educational network, as is the Santa Monica School, which is located in Rivas, Vacía, Madrid. This network shares the same educational project among its schools. At Alborada, for example, this year, the emphasis has been on conveying the true meaning of Christmas. Also, during the first term, secondary school students were encouraged to learn about one of the ways electricity is produced through a visit to a nuclear power plant. Santa Monica School belongs to the Tercio Millennio Foundation, which is also linked to Opus Dei. The community of Madrid granted the educational subsidy to this foundation for the 2014-2015 school year for a non-existent center, as denounced at the time by the Rivas Vacía Madrid City Council, a non-existent center. And you know what's interesting about that is that this is not the first time that I have read about a Opus Dei venture or an Opus Dei individual, someone affiliated with Opus Dei, claiming to work at or claiming to have affiliation with a place that just doesn't exist at all. Just doesn't exist. And the example that I'm thinking of off the top of my head right now is this Opus Dei psychiatrist, psychologist, named Enrique Rojas Montes, and I did an entire deep dive on him if you want to know about that whole thing. But there was an element in that deep dive where he was saying that he was attached to a Opus Dei center at UCM that didn't actually exist, and it was very strange. And it's interesting that that's coming up here again. Enrollment took place when the foundation not only had not built the school, but also lacked a building permit. Given the situation that there were students enrolled in a school that had not yet been built, for a whole year the boys and girls of the Santa Monica School went daily to the Alborada School, the same school that is now known for the complaint of sexual abuse allegedly committed by one of its workers. So they give background on the complaint. It reached the Madrid Assembly through Alicia Toria, a member of the Mass Madrid Party, and that happened in May. In November, the deputy submitted the following question: how many requests for transfer of academic records have been received since the cases of alleged sexual abuse of children at the Alborada school in Alcalá de Henares came to light? But that question has not been debated in committee, as the Assembly's governing board has rejected it. The argument offered is that Alborada School is a private center. Therefore, the board maintains that the cases of alleged sexual abuse in a state-subsidized private school is not a matter within the jurisdiction of the Community of Madrid. Well, that's convenient. And Mass Madrid Alcalá rejects this interpretation and denounces that we cannot allow the right to freedom of choice of school to be used as a shield to avoid administrative control and oversight. The Community of Madrid has jurisdiction, even though it has chosen to look the other way. We will not let this matter drop, and we demand accountability from everyone who failed to act. Alborada School has issued 4 statements since last May. In the first, the school explains that it became aware of a possible act against the integrity of minors by an employee of the Educational Center on May 12th. They detail that we acted according to the established protocol, reporting the matter to the police, specifically to the officers of the Family and Women's Assistant Unit, UFAM, and the facts were communicated to the Education Inspectorate. The statement is signed by the center's director, David Aranz, who advised trusting the security forces of avoiding unfounded interpretations. The latest statement, issued at the end of December, indicates that this information in no way reflects the reality of the situation. It appears to be solely intended to harm the school, it states, of course. There's never any truth to these things. People are just making up these wild and crazy stories just because they've got it out for these random schools. Sure. The school has expressed its regret that this type of information resurfaces and attempts to disrupt a time that should be marked by peace and rest, because this happened over the holidays, over Christmas. Mass Madrid Alcalá has insisted that the protection of children must be above any ideology or particular interest. And I agree. Hear, hear. And the fact that the last statement that the school issued, the only thing that they had to say was that all of this is just, it's getting in the way of this peaceful holiday season, which I think tells you everything that you need to know about how seriously this school is taking this issue, at least at this time. I mean, how else are you supposed to interpret that? They're basically saying, we don't care, go away, you're being too loud, you're getting in the way of our Christmas celebration. Got it. Reading on here, second to last, the Ayuso government has not clarified whether it will withdraw public funding from the Alborada school following ElPearl.com's exclusive reports on child sexual abuse. United Left demands that the Community of Madrid make the center, currently a private-public partnership, strictly public. This was published on January 13th and updated on the 16th. Again, this is from El Plural. Shout out El Plural for keeping the reporting on this thing coming. The United Left of Alcalá, IU, has demanded in recent hours that the Community of Madrid terminate its educational agreement with the Alborada School, a state-subsidized private school with ties to Opus Dei. These statements stem from the school's construction carried out by the Tahomar Foundation and the pastoral care currently provided by priests of the prelature to students and their families. This was acknowledged by the Opus Dei office in Spain in statements to elplural.com following exclusive reports published by this newspaper. The group alleges a serious violation of Article 34 of Organic Law 8/2021 on comprehensive protection of children and adolescents against violence if it is confirmed that the protocols were not activated. The local coordinator of IU, David Cobo, asserted that the region and the city council cannot stand idly by and pointed out that the agreement must be broken and become a 100% publicly managed center following reports that, supported by multiple documents, which are complaints, testimonies, internal emails, and first-person accounts, would confirm the inaction of school officials. So it doesn't matter what the school is saying. All the documentation points to the contrary, that this school did next to nothing when they initially became aware that there was a predator in their employ. Alplural.com has contacted the Ministry of Education to find out if the autonomous community has considered this measure, but at the time of publication of these lines has not received a response. It should be noted that the land on which La Alborada was built was ceded by the government of Esperanza Aguirre in 2009. Meanwhile, the party points out that in the northern part of the municipality, specifically in the neighborhoods of Espartales, Esanche, and Las Cedas, there are only 3 public academic spaces compared to 5 privately owned ones, a situation that the party asserts limits many families when it comes to enrolling their children in school. The community of Madrid blocked parliamentary questions. We had read that before because their subject matter did not pertain to a regional issue but rather to a private school. Furthermore, those close to the potential victims detail the difficulties they've encountered trying to transfer their children to another school, a matter that ultimately falls under the jurisdiction of the Territorial Area Directorate. Several sources link the handling of this process to the fact that the deputy director of Alborada, Javier Doncel, is also the mayor of Anchuelo for the People's Party. The vetoing of questions or the enrollment changes must have an explanation beyond the influence of Opus Dei, they state. Regarding the sexual abuse of minors in schools, the Autonomous Confederation of Parents Associations and Federations of Parents Associations of the region, CONFAPA, that's a funny acronym, lamented in conversation with this media outlet that the school protocols by the community of Madrid, whether for bullying, sexual abuse, or work abuse, are failing. They criticize, among other things, that in the meetings they have held with the sole administration, Isabel Diaz Ayuso's team provides data they don't believe. They told us that 90% of the cases that begin as an alleged harassment end up not being so, and obviously we didn't believe them, they emphasize. The first thing families do when they suspect sexual abuse is to talk to the tutor, then to the head of the studies, later to the school administration, and finally to the inspectorate. The last resort you use is to open a harassment protocol, explains Fernando Bardonez, spokesperson for CONFAPA, highlighting that to get to the point that you have to be able to understand that it is exhausting and the personal cost it entails for both you and the child. Therefore, and because they believe that teachers do not have the necessary skills due to lack of time to be part of a committee assessing cases of school bullying, they ask the affected party to go directly to the prosecutor's office or a police station because in many cases the tools are only activated when there is a human loss. And what did I say earlier? What did I say about how all of these systems and protocols on their own are not going to be enough? They're not enough. They're failing. Actively. According to documents accessed by Alplural.com, the Alborada case, which is still in litigation, originated approximately in September 2024, although the school did not proceed with the dismissal until May of the following year. Family members report the school provided them with limited resources, and that the little help they did receive came from therapists and professionals affiliated with a school or the religious order. And then if you're affected, here's some information for you. They're also on X at AFECT_Alborada, and then Instagram Afecta dos Alborada, if you want to follow any of those or check out this article, link down below. I just am like continuing to be just disappointed. Not surprised necessarily, because I'm frankly never surprised when I hear about something like this happening, but just disappointed because although it's a tale that it seems to be as old as time and it's a story that you see over and over and over again, it's different people. So you would hope that different sets of people would be handling these situations in different ways. But sadly, the knee-jerk does not seem to be evolving in any way, shape, or form. And actually, it's contributing to the breakdown of everything that has been done up to now to try to have these protocols and safeguards in place. I think that's really significant. And another thing that outside of this specific situation has potential ramifications for our societies as a whole, because we cannot rely on these so-called safety protocols to actually provide the safety, because a protocol is just a tool and a tool is only as good as the person who's wielding it. And if people are disinclined to use it because they don't want to rock the boat, or because there's this sort of implicit omerta of silence around anything having to do with, casting the organization in a negative light, what do you have left? So this is the final article that I have for us here today. I think this will pretty much get us caught up to speed. This was published January 14th. And like the previous article said, this is a case that is in litigation now. So I don't know how long it will be before there's another development, before we see something more about this, but trust and believe that when there is another significant development, I will be talking about it. This is a case now that I am going to be keeping an eye on. So the headline of this article, which is from a Spanish site, I can't read, the font is quite tiny. Cannot read what that says, but it's a Spanish news site. And maybe this is from... Oh, here it goes. Sindicato de Estudiantes. So this syndicate of students, some sort of student body, has released a statement. It says, a sexual violence scandal has erupted at the Alborada school in Alcalá de Henares. Let's mobilize to end the contract and demand justice for the victims. So this is from the student union. We send our solidarity and support to the victims and their families and denounce Alborada as directly responsible for the abuses. A complaint has been recently filed against a staff member at the Alborada School in Alcalá de Henares for sexually abusing nearly 20 students aged between 3 and 6, most of whom are on the autism spectrum. Some teachers had already raised the alarm in September 2024, but their warnings were silenced until a teacher in May 2025 was able to record the inappropriate touching of the victims and prevent the administration of this ultra-conservative Catholic school from continuing to cover up the situation. This represents 9 months in which the center refused to act, fully aware of what was happening. 9 months in which this individual enjoyed impunity to abuse children, not to mention all the time this situation went unreported. Behind this school is the Arenales Foundation, an Opus Dei lobby that has seized control of the double lucrative private education sector, a source of profit and a tool for indoctrination. They currently operate 37 schools in 10 countries. In all of them, quality, education, and freedom are never the driving forces behind these business people's actions. Exactly the same as the People's Party, with whom they work hand in hand. The People's Party, in fact, gifted the foundation the 24,000 square meters on which this school stands. It is no coincidence that the current deputy headmaster of the school, Javier Doncel Fernandez, is also the People Party mayor of Anchuelo. To make matters worse, the PP has vetoed a simple parliamentary question in the Madrid Assembly, which was the question of how many requests for academic transfer have there been since this case became public and up to today. All of this reflects the complicity of business owners, the church, the Catholic Church, their political party, the PP, and the business of indoctrination in schools. Obviously, any allegations of sexual abuse will be silenced as much as is possible. It's all about the money. Following the evidence gathered and the complaints filed, the center's management had to file its own complaint, despite having covered up for the employee accused by the families. The grotesque nature of the case is such that the internal documents from the center, as reported by media outlets like El Plural, have already justified his behavior. Quote, he is very affectionate. He has no lewd intentions. He loves the children very much. End quote. Obviously, the cover-up of this situation has gone hand in hand with trying to silence the families, who have been pressured in private meetings with the center. Instead of making themselves available to do justice and provide reparations to the victims, the Opus Dei and PP businessmen are maneuvering to keep their business afloat. But of course, families have taken a step forward, launching a campaign to denounce the impunity and cover-up at the school, as well as the institutional neglect. The community of Madrid itself, through its territorial area directorate, is obstructing families' attempts to transfer their children to other schools. In the case of Barnajas, a specialized service for minors who are victims of sexual abuse and their families, the support has been utterly inadequate. This terrifying situation is a direct consequence of the management of education by private companies, which prioritize profit above all else, and of the Catholic Church, which, as we know, has a long history of permissiveness towards sexual abuse, especially of minors. It's the same culture. It's the same rape culture we experience every day, but with even greater impunity and disguised as the lamb of religion. It's the same story of cover-ups and economic interests that led to Sandra Pena's suicide a few months ago, while her school, the Private Irish Sisters of Loreto, fully aware of the harassment she was suffering, did nothing. One social crime after another. There are others directly responsible besides the accused aggressor, accomplices who have tried to sweep this under the rug and who must resign immediately. Holding them accountable and ensuring an exemplary sentence for the aggressor won't happen by chance. As has been demonstrated countless times, the judiciary of this capitalist system fosters a culture of rape. Similarly, we must prioritize ending the agreement with this center. It is a disgrace that public money continues to flow to a company that allows this situation. We must mobilize to pressure for the termination of the agreement and for justice to be served. The community of Madrid, under Ayuso and the PP, which completely dominates the regional assembly, are part of the problem. So I thought that that was a great article or a great statement, I should say, to end on, because it sums everything up really, really nicely. And I really can't think of anything else to add. This situation makes me feel absolutely sick. One, because this is just one predator at one school, and there are so many victims. The implications of that cannot be good. If everything else that I have said throughout this video is true, which I have every reason to believe that it is. I do believe the statements and the opinions that I have expressed, even if they are just my opinions and just what I have independently deduced from looking at this information. So anyway, I wanted to bring this to your attention. In the year ahead, this is something that I'm going to be looking at a lot more closely. The issue of abuse and child abuse, specifically in Opus Dei. I've looked at the problem of the use of psychiatric medicine in Opus Dei to suppress members' wills. I have looked at the treatment of the assistant numerary class of Opus Dei members and the abuse that they alleged suffering very credibly. And I think that the child side of it is the next logical place to turn my attention, because I see this organization putting a lot of effort, maybe not a lot, maybe that's being hyperbolic, but at least a significant amount of effort into educational efforts, into, establishing a Catholic school in Finland, for example, or Iceland, or any of the other educational ventures that I have discussed over the past few years. I think that they focus a little too much on the children, this organization. And because of that, it creates an environment that is ripe for exploitation. It's ripe for predators to infiltrate and do what predators do. And predators will always do that. You can count on it. They are perhaps the lowest of low common denominators. You can count on it. Like I said, they move around us. They are among us. And all of these different protocols and measures and meetings and everything else, these assemblies and these groups that are trying to mobilize, the only way that anything is going to actually change is for individual people to be mobilized, to become self-proclaimed, self-identified mandatory reporters. Because if every single person had that attitude, the protection that we could extend to the most vulnerable in our society would be significantly greater. So maybe that's just where I want to leave things for today. Like I said, I will be keeping an eye on this situation. Once there are another batch of developments or something significant happens that I read, I will be sure to present it here. And just more generally on the issue of child safety in Opus Dei, stay tuned because I have more to say on that as well. And unfortunately, there is no lack of resources and information for me to pull from to make my case. So, anyway, thank you so much for being here with me and for giving this your time and attention. I know that this is a tremendously difficult subject to contend with. I understand that this is not one that everyone is going to be able to contend with. I understand that not everyone is in a place where they can deal with something like this. So, if you are and if you can, thank you very much. Again, if you're interested in supporting me monetarily, because this type of thing is not loved by the algorithmic gods, you can buy me a coffee for $5 or a super chat. I think the lowest is like $1. It's like the cheapest that you can do. And all of it adds up. All of it makes a difference. But just being here, watching, listening, giving this a thumbs up, and leaving a comment if you have anything to say, that goes so far. Really, it does so much to move the needle on getting my work out to more people. So thank you so much for doing that. I know there are so many of you here who do, because I see it. So thank you. If you're interested in learning more about my work, you can obviously check out my channel. I have my socials and everything else linked down below. If you are interested in reading my work, I have a Substack called Bet Griffin and the Deep Dive Project, where you can read short form articles that I've written. I also distribute my podcast through there, so you can listen there as well. And I've been trying to spend some time kind of getting that space cleaned up and organized. And I really, really appreciate everybody who has come over to support me over there. It really means a lot. Thank you. So, with all of that said, if you or someone that you know is in need of mental health support, I've left a variety of resources linked down below. Life is very hard, but we do not have to go at it totally alone. Yes, there are barriers, very real barriers to us accessing the care that we need, but you do not have to go at it totally alone or unequipped. There are resources for you. I've done my best to find some good ones down below. So if you need help, please reach out. With that said, I will see you for another deep dive here very soon. And in the meantime, remember, nolite te bastardes carborundorum. Do not let the bastards drag you down.